You're listening to the People's Podcast. This is JSC Radio. This is the 105th episode of the People's Podcast. You are listening to J. Scott Confidential, better known as JSC Radio. Welcome back. J. Scott Smith here. I want to thank you, as always, for supporting the show, including on the YouTube page where you are right now. That's right, bit.ly/JSCTube. You want to get to it quicker, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell so you know the next time one of these videos shows up right here on the YouTube page. I want to big up my man, Doc Illingsworth, the producer of the soundtrack of this show. You hear his music underneath you right now. Be sure to support his new EP called Old Man Raps. No, he's not an old man, but he damn sure knows how to do the rapidy raps. Plus, big up to my man, Awesome Jones, who handles the theme song, the lead opening theme to the podcast called Blue Chucks. You hear it every time you check out the show. So let's get off into this. Our guest on this week's episode is none other than Brooke Thomas. Brooke is a host and producer for the Young Turks, where she's been since November of 2017, but her career certainly did not start in Los Angeles. She's a native of Muskogee, Oklahoma, and a graduate of the University of Oklahoma. She started her career in North Dakota and has taken a winding road as a reporter and anchor that has led her through Lubbock, Texas, Memphis, Tennessee, Dallas, Texas, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, which was the first time I saw her, and now she's in Los Angeles with TYT. She's an amazing young woman who is very open and honest about what's happening with black and brown journalists in this business, and I was able to sit down and talk to her for nearly an hour earlier this week for this exclusive interview, or should I say exclusive conversation, right here on J. Scott Confidential. So without further ado, I'm going to stop running my mouth and we're going to get right to it. This is the 105th episode of the People's Podcast. This is J. Scott Confidential, better known as JSC Radio, and let's get off into our conversation with the one, the only, the amazing Brooke Thomas. So, Brooke, I can say that it is an absolute pleasure to be able to finally talk to you. After we've gone back and forth here. It's a pleasure to have you on JSC Radio, by the way, and thank you so much for doing this with me.
No, thank you for having me. I really do appreciate it.
I will say that in the prep I've done on you, on the person that you are, you have a pretty cool story going from the very beginning. You've worked your way through small markets. You've done the traditional route that so many people in media have done, whether it's radio, TV, whatever. And so many people see you on nowadays is on the Young Turks, and I'll get to your time on TYT. But I like to talk about people's stories first, like really where they start. I know you're from Oklahoma originally. And what first got you interested in wanting to go into media? How old were you when you figured out TV media is what you wanted to do?
You know, I have no idea. That's so weird that I don't think like a really strong point of when, like, you know what, I realized this is what I'm going to do. I think that in college, it felt more like, what else would I do? This fits. I think that I was raised by my grandparents to very, very old people, like very old, like older than your average grandparents. And, older people, older Black people, especially, they love the news. They like the newspaper. They like to watch the news all day long, different versions of the news. And so I was right there with them, watching the news, consuming the news. And I like it, watching Oprah, watching Entertainment Tonight, because we watched the channel, we watched everything. I just remember everything back to back. Those were the soap operas she watched. That was the news channel she liked. I remember the meteorologist's name. And then I was always kind of like a part of speaking activities or programs in like middle school and high school. And then here comes college, and we got to the point to where you had to choose a major, and it just made sense.
It just fit you.
Yeah.
It's so interesting. And you're from Muskogee, Oklahoma.
I am, yeah, a really small town.
Dude, I've heard of the phrase Okie from Muskogee.
But never met one, right?
Never met one. You're the first Okie from Muskogee that I have met. How was what was it like growing up in Muskogee, Oklahoma? My cousin actually worked in Lawton, Oklahoma in her first
Okay.
TV job, and she's originally from the South too, and that was an interesting experience for her.
So she was at K-SWO. I
She
think it's like,
was.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
See, oh yeah, so yeah, it's like she was, that's where she started. And
Yeah.
she's told me about the life in Oklahoma, just kind of it was different even for her growing up in Alabama. For you, what's it like? What was it like growing up down in that part of the country?
That's so funny because I thought I was from the South until I moved to Memphis for work. And then I realized that there's the deep South and there is the somewhat middle Southern part of the country that really is just the country.
The mid the
It's
mid
not
South,
at all the
Southwest.
South, right? It is
It,
not at all the South.
it's its own spot. And interesting you brought up Memphis. I know one of your early jobs was in the Dakotas. Like
Yeah, my
everybody
very first job was in North Dakota. It was
everybody's got
miserable.
I was so tell me about that because I know I talk to a lot of students as well. And I
Mhm.
tend to tell them is that generally your first radio job or TV job is going to be in a smaller market, one of those markets in the hundreds down low. My first media market was Lansing, Michigan. That was
Yeah.
112. And you started in North Dakota. I've mentioned parts of Oklahoma, different places. What was that experience like for you out of college? You get to North Dakota and you said it was miserable the way you
Yeah, it was
described.
miserable. My first TV job was just awful. I was a bureau reporter about an hour away from the main station. I had no coworkers that I worked with every day. I shot everything, edited everything, which is fine. But like I was by myself and it just was so weird. And I do know that like still this business isn't always, like super glamorous and you are going to you have to make sacrifices that you could also look at them as kind of like investments in your career. Right.
Okay.
But I think that hearing, like I was a kid who came from a family that didn't have a ton of money. Like I was, a good student, a hustler, and I wanted to be in this business. And I kept hearing all of, it's going to be this, it's going to be this, it's going to be really small, it's going to be this. But I think that I should have taken a little bit more time to be a little choosier because I'm not sure that your first job has to be a horror show.
Interesting.
I think
and that's true, by the way.
It's not going to be perfect. But I think that sometimes we have a couple more options. And I don't know if I had to do everything, like move to the snow, tour a bureau, be an MMJ. I think that was too much. I think it was like pick one of the rough things.
You inherited all three.
Right.
You went with the combo meal. Give me that one in the middle in a state with like 8 or 9 black people in it to begin with.
I know. I would hear that all the time. Like, you must be Somalian. And you know what? I don't know. Maybe.
Wow.
I don't know. Where are we going with this? Maybe. I don't. 23andMe wasn't super popular. I don't know.
Just had that conversation on the last episode where I find out that a large amount of me is like from either Cameroon, Nigeria, or Ghana, and it's those three. And when you walk into these smaller towns and these smaller markets, and you're the only one there, the only one in the newsroom, and I hear that a lot in the podcast that you do too, controlling our narrative, which has become like an obsession of mine, going through all the episodes, getting.
Do you like it?
I love that podcast.
Good,
I love it.
good,
I love the
good.
format of it because you guys, and thankfully on this podcast we can say whatever too. You guys manage to shoot the shit about a lot of things and just go back and forth, and there's a lot of open dialogue there.
Yeah.
And I can tell with you, just from talking to you and having seen you, we're kindred spirits when it comes to black people in media.
Mm-hmm.
I feel that we both kind of come from the same idea where there's this idea of black members of the media and in newsrooms where we often have to either temper what we say. We have to kind of toe a very fine line in these
right.
places. And some of the things that I've heard you say at the same time, I'm just, as soon as I listened to it, it's like, geez, it sounds like we worked in the exact same place.
We've all worked in the exact same place, unfortunately.
What have some of your experiences, and we obviously don't have to talk about a particular market because apparently it's across just about all of them. What have some of your experiences been on both the positive and negative side? Because anyone who sees you, you're this attractive brown woman, not just black woman, brown woman. And I've seen so often for so many years, there are black women on television
it's not too many that I see who look like us, especially when I was a kid growing up. There weren't a lot of black women. I can name two off the top of my head in Detroit even, who look like you. And I know that there are the pitfalls of being in newsrooms and the things that we put up with on a daily basis that I don't think people quite understand. It's different for a black journalist in these settings.
No, for sure. And I'm glad that you asked me also like the positives, because you're not often asked that. But when I worked in Memphis, I went there for an interview, and the news director, Ken Job, he picked me up, and then I went back to the station, sat in his office, interviewed with him. Ken is a black man who like everybody in this business knows. And then also another executive, Nick Burchett, like met with him, met with a lot of the other employees. And then I think it was the next day, because I spent the night in Memphis and then came back to the station the next day. They took me to lunch. And I was really like, okay, I'm really vibing with this place. I like this city. I like these people. And Nick says, I want you to meet someone. She'll be in a little bit. Mm-hmm. And the main anchor, her name is Merle Purvis.
Okay.
And she had been there. She's very popular. She'd been there for years, completely deserving of all of her popularity. And so he took me to her office. And so I go in her office and sit down. Mm-hmm. And we talked for hours. And that I was already really interested in moving to Memphis and taking this job. But I was sold. Like, I was like, there's nothing can compete with this. And she's like a big sister to me now, but just like such a mentor, and just to have like another black woman, another dark brown skinned black woman who has been in this business for so long. And then also like, sometimes I think you need a check too, because you can get in a space where you think everything is bad, and you need somebody to be like, okay, no, you're tripping. Like, what I mean? You need someone that you trust. It just was so nice to have her. And sometimes we had difficult conversations, but there was everything was positive. Everything was about growth and learning, but just like someone who had my back and still to this day has my back. And I remember her coming in early to give me like a critique on a live shot that I had done during the morning show. And that was such a positive experience, as it's someone who just like genuinely wants you to be your best. And lots of compliments. And so it wasn't just like her helping me be better. It was her being encouraging, and to my personal life, to my professional life. And so I want to be that. I always want to be that. When I was in Philly, I started this Facebook group. And it's a little private Facebook group. And I think we have like 800 or so members, but it's called Black Women on TV. Mm-hmm. And it is all Black women who are on air, period, like in news. So any aspect of news, traffic, reporter, anchor, sports, anybody who's on everything. Air. Mm-hmm. There's a couple people in Nigeria, someone in London. But just kind of coming from that space of my second TV job, my first TV job, I basically had no day-to-day coworkers. My second TV job in Lubbock, it was a good environment, but I was the only Black person on air in the entire market.
The entire market.
In the entire market, yeah. And so it was kind of like, you don't really know yourself, that early in your career. There's so many things. Like, you don't know what makeup works best. And then you have a consultant who comes in and the darkest color is like this color, and it's like, what am I gonna do?
Is it the palm of your hand? She's pointing to the palm of her hand, by the way.
Oh yeah, that's right. So we're on video together, but I am forgetting that not everybody is going to be able to see me. But yeah, so I wanted to just kind of like start this space where those same women who are starting out in this business aren't alone, because you have this group of women who have your back and who can be what Merle was to me, but online.
And that's a good thing to bring up, because quite often we walk into these newsrooms and sometimes we're on that island. Like you noted, you were essentially on an island unto yourself in North Dakota and in Lubbock, Texas. You get to Memphis, which is a much blacker city, much more diverse. It was like
99.9%. I was like, what is this world?
It's so brown here. All these.
Wow.
My experience has been working in places like Lansing, Michigan, which was a relatively diverse city. It was like an oasis in the middle of the mitten in Michigan. But other than that, outside of Detroit, Lansing, and Flint, you're not going to have a lot of Black places to work. You kind of have to get in and out of there. When I worked in New Jersey, I was kind of just stuck in the middle of this shore town where I'm like the lone Black dude. It's not till I walked into my current place in Philadelphia where I was finally in a newsroom, I was like, holy shit, I'm not the only black guy in here.
Yeah.
We can actually have rap conversations. We can actually toss the room at each other, and we know that, hey, man, that's not cool. Or maybe we should cover this from this angle or do this sort of thing. It can be very uplifting when you know you've got a crew behind you, instead of having to be that person fighting from underneath all the time, and you've just got that one voice in there. And it can be stressful. And I know for being a woman, it's even tougher. It's hard enough on us as black men, but I know it's even harder on women sometimes, really coming into these places and these spaces.
For sure. And just like no one who kind of moves through this world like you, it's hard to have even some of the most basic conversations, and not even from a malicious point at all times. It's just, we're all different.
Oh, exactly. And that's also kind of wondering, you don't want to get miscast as angry. If you speak up, that's the code word for everybody, is that, oh, you were angry and you were loud, you were aggressive.
And I think right. It's a negative stereotype that has nothing to do often with, the action that's being expressed. It's really just has to do with the person who's saying that and their perspective of black women, even if they're smiling.
You mentioned Memphis, and in my research on you, you had an amazing story about an instance in Memphis where a gentleman was accused of a crime.
Oh my goodness. Yeah.
And I found the clip of it. It was fascinating to watch. I'd love for you to tell that story, because I can't do it any justice, but it's almost one of those things I would tell students, is that you always have to stay ready in case a story like that jumps off. And I'll let you go from there. But this was actually pretty incredible in Memphis.
Yeah. So my schedule in Memphis was kind of, I got to work. I don't know. Did I get to work at 3 or? I don't remember. Let's say I get to work at 3. I'm on air at 4:30. And so I anchored from 4:30 to 6, and kind of throughout that time, the first hour and a half of the show, me and my co-anchor, I would always be out in the field and he stayed in studio afterwards, because we had a 5.5-hour long morning show. Fox local stations, they don't have like the big 3 networks. They don't have a national network morning show. So the locals just kind of stretch it out through that time period, just in case people don't know why we had a 5.5-hour long show. But throughout the first hour and a half, that's when, I'm kind of figuring out what's the top story in case something doesn't break. What would I want to cover? What should I be on to report on throughout the rest of the morning show when I'm out in the field? And there was a story about a woman who says that she was carjacked and 2 of her children were kidnapped in the middle of the night. It happened that night before. So just a few hours before, she says that, I think the story was that she pulled up around midnight or so with her 3 kids in the car, I think like a 5-year-old, a 2-year-old, and an infant. And when she got out of the car, someone came from the back of the car around and they stabbed her with an ice pick or a pin or something like that, and then jumped in the driver's seat. Well, the 5-year-old, I think, had the wherewithal to get out of the car as the car is slowly backing out of the driveway. And then the 2 babies were in car seats, and they're babies, they're kind of stuck. It's kind of amazing that the 5-year-old was that brave. And the
definitely.
kids later on, the 2 younger kids were both found in the middle of the night, I think a couple hours later, within, I guess, miles of each other. But the mother was in the hospital, and police say that the mother gave them a suspect, that she's saying the person who stole her car, who stabbed her, is a man that she knew. So we had this man's name, and police had put out this information. We had this man's name. And so all that morning, we've been reading the story saying police are looking for this man. They say he's this, and that. And I go out. That's the story I'm going to cover. So I go out, and I think my live shot started around either 6:30 or 7. So I get to my spot. It's a neighborhood. During the breaks, I'm knocking on all the doors like, hey, does anybody want to talk? This happened to their neighbor. Nobody wants to talk. Nobody knows anything. Nobody wants to be on camera. Nobody wants to talk about anything. And maybe after my first live shot, I'm sitting in the live truck. We had this Hummer. It was a Fox 13 thing in Memphis, but I'm sitting in the Hummer. My photographer is outside. I think it was Randy. I think his name was Randy. And so he's outside messing with his camera. But I'm sitting in the passenger seat and someone knocks on the window. So I roll the window down and I'm like, hey, what's up? And he's like, my name is, and he gives his name and he says, my mom says y'all are looking for me. And I'm like, what? And so the name he gives me is the name that police are telling us they're looking for. And so it just kind of was quick thinking. I think that when you hear that this person allegedly stabbed someone, you're uncomfortable. You are nervous about being in their space. And then on another thing, I'm like, this person has been accused of a crime, but not convicted of a crime. And like, is it fair for me to not give him the same space to say his piece when I'm giving the police officer's narrative?
It's the innocent until proven guilty.
Right. And so it's, it's not my job to make any decisions. And so I said, give me 2 seconds. And I rolled the window up and I called my producer, Shannon, at the time. And I'm like, listen, I think that we need to break in. I think we need to go on air. Like, can this happen? This happen? And so she's like, oh my goodness, yes.
Fox 13's Brooke Thomas, live on Pleasant Road in Whitehaven, where this all happened. Brooke, what's the latest development here?
Yeah, well, this morning we've been telling you all morning, police say a woman was carjacked, stabbed, and her 2 kids went missing when the person who stabbed her, they say, took the car with the kids in it. Now, they found the 2 kids later, but all morning long they've been looking for the man they say did this. And we're told they've been looking for a man named Derek Fisher. I've been telling you that all morning long. Derek Pfeiffer, all morning long. A man named Derek Pfeiffer just walked up to me and said, he's Derek Pfeiffer. He wants to clear his name. We have him right here. Derek, so you're telling me that your mom woke you up and told you she's hearing about your name on the news?
Yes, ma'am.
What'd she say?
She said, she told me, what did I do last night? Boy, you did this, boy, you did that. So I know I ain't do nothing, so I put on my shoes and I walked over her house just to let her know. She know I ain't do nothing like that. She just know my full name, and she only been around me and she don't been around nobody else, so she expect me to do something like that.
Who is she?
Nisha. This her name in this house right here. I help her with the kids, everything, the whole house. She live by herself, about 5, 6 kids. She already know that I don't stay up no kids, and she was just crying to me because she got her kids back and stuff like that.
Why do you think police are looking for you? Why do you think they got your name?
Because she gave them my name. She know my full name, and if she don't, and I know how she is. If she can't get her truck or her kids back, she gonna put a name out here because this me. I be in these streets right here. I be over her house, and I be over there in 2 lines.
So I go out and he's live on the air, says his name, and it's funny because I was nervous, and this is like my second job because I was in North Dakota for such a short period of time, and there was such a different learning aspect when you are MMJ bureau than when you're in a real newsroom. And so I was super green, and I was so nervous. I remember I said his name. I feel bad like using his name, even though like you can find it, but I misspoke and said a different name.
We're told they've been looking for a man named Derek Fisher. I've been telling you that all morning long. Derek Pfeiffer, all morning.
He corrected me. The guy behind me was like, no, it's this. And I'm like, right. And he went on air and he said he was clearing his name, that she was confused, that they're friends, they hang out, and it just was a kind of a confusing story. But he talked for a while, and then as he walks off, he turns around and says,
well, thanks for talking to us.
All right, thank you. You're beautiful.
All right, there you have it. That's what we have. A man named Derek Pfeiffer came up to us.
You're beautiful. And I remember my thought was, sir, not now.
Fam, this is not
focus. Okay?
This is not the time nor the place.
Right. And then later, after I was long gone from Memphis, he was acquitted from those charges. The jury found him not guilty.
So he was telling the truth. That's fascinating. In my research, I looked the guy up after the fact, and apparently he's recently been arrested for armed robbery. So he's actually sitting in jail.
Oh, again.
In Memphis right now. But he was cleared of what he was accused of then. But unfortunately now he's still in jail, or back in jail, I should say.
Yeah. Wow.
That is fascinating because there are a lot of moments, and that is maybe one of the biggest stay ready type of moments, because sometimes you go find news and sometimes the news comes and finds you.
Yeah. You just got to be willing to talk to everybody. I think sometimes people go into these neighborhoods and don't want to have conversations with strangers. I'm protected. I'm with a photographer. I'm with someone who has my back. I'm fine. I should roll the window down and speak to people, and that's where, you get some of your best stories, not even like an incident like this, but just community stories. You get them from the community. You don't get them from press releases. You don't get them from the police. You don't get them from the school board. You get them from the people who live there and who watch your show.
Absolutely. Some of the best stories I've gotten were things I just random. It wasn't, I went for one thing and I spark up a conversation with someone else and it's like, oh wait, we've got something, we might have something here.
Yeah.
This can turn into something else. in this day and age in journalism, is we find ourselves constantly having to kind of come up with different ways to do our jobs because it's dangerous out there.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, because I hear it all the time. I see it, especially on the TV side where TV reporters are wide open. You have women who are being harassed by dudes in the background or people trying to speak or trying to talk to them. I think as someone who's been out there, who's been in the field, very quickly kind of gives a little bit more of an understanding of how tenuous that can be, because you can have a great moment where you're having a back and forth with someone and there could be some jackass in the background trying to make a name for themselves, or they're trying to mess with you on air. How do you maintain your focus when you're standing in a situation like that?
You know what? I don't know. I don't know why I'm good at that, because sometimes it doesn't even come from the people around you. Sometimes it's what's going on in your ear. Sometimes the producer is talking to you. Sometimes you can hear yourself accidentally because of some button press. I don't know how I stay focused amidst, like, you know, wild things happening. But also, I think that you learn to focus in kind of, you're always on deadline. There could be a scene that's chaotic. I mean, think about like something in a bigger market, you don't necessarily cover these at all, but in a smaller market, you're at a house fire, right? So it's a really big house fire and there's a lot of people standing outside, and you have got to figure out how to avoid the smoke, how to walk through and find somebody who actually saw it, who knows what's going on, who lives there, who is willing to talk. And you've got to make sure your photographer's over there so you can get things going at the same time. You've got to get all this information, and then you've got to rush over to a quiet place so you can write your story really quickly, and you may not have a laptop there to go through your sound bites. So you've got to, you know, go back through your notes, and you just learn how to focus while you're really, really busy. And I imagine, I guess, like I've never really thought about it, but I guess like the default from that is a bonus is that you learn how to stay focused when somebody is, you know, doing weird stuff behind the camera, you know. I don't know.
It's strange, but it's amazing how you're able to make a lot of that work. And I look at the path you've taken. You've gone from University of Oklahoma to North Dakota. You've been in Lubbock and Memphis and Philadelphia, and then you find yourself in Los Angeles.
In Dallas at one point.
Dallas too. That's right. So a couple of major markets, and now you find yourself in Los Angeles, and now you're on TYT, Young Turks.
Yeah.
How did that come about for you? When you got to LA, I know you were doing red carpet stuff. I remember seeing you do that. How did the opportunity come about with TYT?
So when I moved to LA because I signed a holding deal for a show on Fox Local. So kind of like Fox Local, like The Real Wendy Williams, like this Fox syndication, that are syndicated shows that are on Fox Local stations around the country. I signed a deal for a show called Top 30, and it was a holding deal, which meant that I couldn't officially take another job all summer. But there were multiple women who were potentially going to fill this female co-host role who, like one of them would be chosen. So it wasn't a done deal, but I felt really confident and good about it, you know? So I move out here and I'm freelancing kind of in the meantime and taking meetings. And I was on my third meeting at E! News, and this guy walks in, and I just remember he was just beautiful and dressed so nice. And I was like, oh my goodness, who is this? Like, you know, like you get that vibe, like I want to be friends with this person. Oh my goodness. And he sits down next to me and we started chatting, and we ended up, they were kind of auditioning a bunch of us kind of for a panel show and moving people in and out and trying to see like, you know, who linked with who, a little bit more of your personality while interacting with other people. And we were on set together and just had so much fun that we exchanged numbers afterwards and kind of kept in touch. And after the holding deal fell through, I didn't get that job. Actually, none of the women got that job. They brought in a different woman. After that, I was still freelancing, doing different like LA things. And he called me and said, hey, I have this co-host position. I know you freelance. I'm wondering like if you wanted to come in, like this is what it pays, this is what it is, and it would just be this one day, and I'd like to work with you again. And I was like, sure, I'll do it. Like send me the info. So I show up. We had such a good time together, and then I met some of the other people here, and then sent my reel to somebody here, JR. Also here. So Jason Carter is the initial guy who brought me in. And then JR, he's the senior producer here. He checked out my reel and was like, oh, you should be doing stuff over on like our hard news section, like on our main show. And he got me on John. It's like my little trifecta. It's Jason, JR, and John. And then I started filling in on John's show. And then I joked that I just never left. But eventually I was here so often, like they would call me in so often to do things. And now I work here full time.
You're locked down. They got you.
Yeah.
And it sounds like it's a wonderful environment for you. It's a
I
perfect
do think
fit for you.
It's a good environment for sure. Yeah, I do think it's a very good environment.
So what is it like working with some of the staff there? I know Cenk is someone who's Cenk Uger is obviously somebody who's associated most with it, and I remember he said something really glowing about you, like they were doing a whole year in review, like they did a whole thing. It was the year of Brooke Thomas, and he said he had all these awesome things to say about you. It seems like I could tell, I see happiness when you're there. It's like it brings the best out of you there, and even seeing how you host and how you are. You managed to you add a different air and a different voice to the place, and they seem to have embraced that and really bring that out of you more.
I think that's nice of you to say. Thank you. I hope so. I
think it's done pretty well. I would say you've done pretty well there. It's a very progressive network, clearly.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it seems like that fits more than anything else.
That word too means something different too. Progress is different depending on where you start, where your starting point is. I
would say in terms of since the time you've been there and the atmosphere around there, when you look at what you're doing for TYT, what would you say is maybe your favorite thing about being in there, about being on this network?
The newsroom, like my time in the newsroom, like my friends, they are. I have made some really, really good friends in this business. Like I can go down the line of like my jobs and outside of North Dakota, because I worked solo.
You were your favorite person in North Dakota.
I worked solo in North Dakota. But outside of that, I can name multiple people that I consider really, really good friends from each of my jobs, and think of just those moments when it clicked, oh, this is my person here. Okay. But here there's a lot of those people. And that's been really nice.
And now that you're there and in this current political climate, which is something that TYT is very much deep into. For you, what is that like being in a network such as this, where it's not like it's nowhere near like Fox News or any of those other ones where it's highly polarized on the right. What's it like being in a place like this where they're very out front about their politics and very out front and open about the things they believe in and fight for? What is that for you? What's that like for you to be able to kind of openly express a lot of that too, being able to say what you really feel sometimes?
Yeah, I think that there's an honesty that gets stifled in other aspects of this business that I don't fully have to worry about here. I think that, I'm a Black woman in America. I can never not be political. Do you remember, oh my goodness, and I'm losing her name, and that's so weird because she's super famous, but there was a sheet cake segment on SNL about kind of ignoring politics and eating sheet cake, and the pushback was
oh my God, that is
right,
Tina
it's
Fey.
happening to you. It's Tina Fey.
Tina Fey.
And so the pushback was well, yeah, if you look like Tina Fey, you can eat sheet cake. But if your actual livelihood depends on politics, politics determined my right to vote, my right to sit, and that wasn't too long ago, and my right to sit in this space with my coworkers who don't look like me. So many different aspects of me being able to live my life to the fullest as I am right now are dependent upon politics or were. So I don't get to ever live my life regardless of what boss I have at the time and what they're saying to do and what the rules are at that network or at this place or at that place. I never get to delete that from who I am. And so here I don't have to, and I think we talk about being non-biased, and I do think I'm kind of going on a tangent here, but I do think that the type of journalist and who I wanted to be and my responsibility changed dramatically for me after Trayvon Martin was killed. It was a really big turning point for me, I think, as a person and what I felt like my responsibilities were. And I do think that when we talk about being non-biased, I think that everybody has a different perspective and there are things that you can't delete. And a lot of times we're not necessarily being non-biased. What we are two things. You're being, silence is the voice of the oppressor. Exactly. And so oftentimes your silence is choosing a side.
Exactly.
Like, you know what I mean? Which causes harm often. And then also, I think like what people deem non-bias is generally like what they really mean is like, no, come at this as if you are coming from the perspective of a rich white man who's slim and who is a Christian.
And doesn't and older. They skew older
So
too.
anything that person would, and did I say straight? Yes. And that person, anything, that's what I meant. Like all of those things, like that is what people deem to be non-biased, but that's so unfair. And it's also, it still comes with bias. It's just that you can't delete your perspective in this world, and everyone's it's different, and it matters in the way we move through this world and what we learn and what we know and what we experience. That matters, and it's different for a lot of people. And I don't think that, you know, like you can be Christian and still tell a story very fairly about an atheist.
Exactly.
You know, but that doesn't mean that you have to pretend that you didn't go to church Sunday. Like you know what I mean? And
you
no one would force you to because it's a Christian thing. It's totally okay.
Yeah. To
celebrate straightness and to celebrate Christianity. It's okay to say thank God on the news. It's okay to congratulate a straight couple getting married, and at a, you know, when it's a kicker at the end of a show in a small market. When we start openly celebrating things that affect marginalized communities, that is when people get like a little shaken, like, oh, it makes some people uncomfortable, but it makes a lot of people uncomfortable when you don't acknowledge it. Like, why don't they matter? And I think I always say, like, child abuse, murder, bad,
exactly.
All bad. No one says that you can't think murder is bad, but they struggle with saying you can't think racism is bad, or you can't just kind of call it what it is. And so I don't have to live in that space here, which is nice.
It's the conundrum that a lot of us deal with in newsrooms. I've run into that. I've run into situations where I very openly called a spade a spade. You see it right there.
That's what our job is.
Exactly. It's one of those things where, like, I covered sports for years, and my thing is, if I look at a scoreboard and it says 104 to 98, that's not in dispute. Right. If the score was 104 to 98. If I look at something and see that's racist, you called somebody an N-word, you dropped all these racial slurs, that's racist. That's not up for debate. That's not one of those things where if a certain presidential candidate tends to have a whole lot of followers and supporters that happen to be a part of white supremacist groups, it's kind of easy to say that, gee, he kind of appeals to white supremacists.
Yeah.
But don't in turn send me an email and say, but you might be offending his supporters.
Right.
But they don't see this as a problem. They don't see that as a deal breaker. In fact, some of them are,
because like the businesses are still, the perspectives and like who makes the decision, those perspectives are still very heavy in one area. And not everyone who looks this way or identifies as this is unwilling to bend and learn. Thank goodness. But some still are.
And that's the tough part, because it leads to issues that we run into, and it leads to occasionally our own reporters being marginalized or silenced. And it's so weird. And when you said that, it's like because generally speaking, you want to be able to call facts out and be more honest about that. You don't always get that opportunity to do so. I guess one last thing here, because this also brings us back to your podcast again. Your podcast, Controlling Our Narrative. What inspired you to get into this podcast game? How has that been for you? Because I've listened to it, and I've listened to it kind of evolve slowly. It's gotten better each time I've heard it. How has that been for you, this process of getting into a podcast and doing more of this and being able to speak freely the way you do on there?
So it's a show that like I want, and I wanted to see, and I wanted to exist, and that I wanted to be a part of. So that was part of it. And I think there are kind of two moments. One of them is during like the last presidential election go round, there was a lot of talk about middle Americans, and it was being used as a euphemism for white people.
Right.
I happen to be from Oklahoma.
I'm sitting here from Michigan, which is also middle America.
And so it's like Detroit, Milwaukee, you know, like none of this is
Indianapolis, St. Louis, Minneapolis, Chicago, you know, City, Kansas City. We can there's black people in all those places.
Even freaking like Columbus, Ohio. We don't exist. Atlanta, I would say that's somewhat like middle America. It's not a coastal, like it's not It's not New York City. It's not Los Angeles. St.
Even the heart-
Louis,
even
you
the heart
know?
of the South.
And so, but that was just kind of taken as default. Like, yes, this is who we're talking to. And that ignores so many people. Most Black Americans live in Middle America in this country. That was one part, just like wanting to be able to talk about how everyday stories affect us, Black people who are also everyday people, and the importance of like not leaving us out of the conversation. And like, yeah, we should have a conversation about how climate change specifically affects Black people in historically redlined communities that end up right around highways, that end up in how like pollution, and we should know that, and we should talk about that, and those things should be talked about. And also, I was at the Cork, it's this bar here in LA, and this was, I think it was like NBA TV that was on, and it was after the NBA draft, and they were talking about NBA fashion, and there was 4 white guys on a panel. There was like, and maybe it wasn't NBA TV. So let me take that part back, but I do know it was about the NBA draft, and there was a guy who like looked like he was from Miami, and he had like 3 or 4 like big dreads and his hat sitting on top, and there became this like conversation as if they didn't know that so many people in Miami look like that.
That is that, which is incredible, because there are whole sections of Miami where I was just in Miami for right. I was just in Miami for an ABJ. It's like there looked like that all over pretty much all over South Florida, not just even Miami.
Right. And so I think like one aspect of it is just that like, oh my gosh, we need to be acknowledged. Like our stories need to be told. Our stories need to be normalized. And the other part is like, okay, when our stories are told, we're not sitting at the table.
Not at all.
And then another part is like having, conversations like with my Black friends, like with my family, like we don't always agree. We're so different. And I call it, I joke about this all the time. Do you ever like watch Survivor and you find yourself, it's just this thing that happens because we do say like representation matters. And even as adults, we find ourselves like, it's hard not to be excited when the one person looks somewhat like you, right? And so like you're watching Survivor, right? And there's that one Black person, you end up rooting for them, right? But it's so frustrating because you don't like them.
Like, sir, I want you to win, but I'm not feeling you.
Right. And so how nice would it be if there were 8 Black people and you got to pick your favorite based on personality?
I can finally be like, I don't like this guy, and I don't feel guilty saying, homie, I want you to lose. Like, get the hell out of here.
Right. And so I don't know, meshing all of that together. So like bringing different voices and also normalizing like us and how everyday news affects us as everyday people in America, and also normalizing like our culture and in a way that people aren't shocked about things that are so normal to us.
Such little things as certain things that go on in Black households for holidays, certain traditions, certain things you're into. My mother's originally from the South, and there's a lot of stuff from Southern households that carry over into the Midwest because of the migration and everything like that people don't fully get. Like they'll look at us weird when there's certain things. It's like, that's just what we do. What are you talking about? This is what we eat. And sometimes what we eat may not always be the best, but this is what we eat. This is what we dance to. This is what we're into. Our music, our clothing. There's so many different things. I just had the last episode. My friend is in Ghana, and Ghanaian culture is so much different from African American culture. And she told me about how she's had to she sees the differences between the two even more expressively now. But people don't get that because at times we're just kind of written off as this monolith. And we do not operate as a monolith. We do think different. We carry ourselves differently.
We all somehow had the same mother who refused to take us to McDonald's without first asking if we had McDonald's money. But after that, we're very different.
We might have all had the same mother who at some point told us to fix our face. I understand. Exactly. And admittedly, yes, I know I'm not one of your little friends. I get that. I know. Mama, I get it. Even now, I still get that. What is something, as we start to wrap this up, what is like a bit of advice you would give to a young Black woman who wants to come into this business and knows that there's going to be good days and bad days? What would you tell, from your experience, what would you tell a young Black woman coming into this right now? Say she's about to graduate and she's on her way in and wants to do TV, wants to do radio. What would you say to her as advice?
Oh my goodness. We are so much better and more successful and so much stronger together. So like, don't compete with the other woman at the station. Like, rock with her, support her, help her, be nice to each other, make friends. You know, obviously, like, don't put yourself in if she's, you know, not like working, then obviously remove yourself from that situation. But check your competitiveness. Like, what's for you will be for you. And my life has been so much better, I think, when I was being helpful, like taking how Merle treated me. And I'm glad that like that was like my first example, just someone who just has my back, and that I just got to learn. I think that like life is so much easier when you can either be that person for someone, or when someone is that person for you and you're accepting of that. And I think that it's hard because this business pits everybody against each other, and there's so many insecurities because there may only be this position or this position, but you're not in competition with anybody. What's for you is for you. And even if you don't get the job and this other person does, it's because it's for them. Like, that's who they wanted in that role. And there's something else and something that's a better fit for you. And I think that like keeping your head kind of like locked on straight, like through that, as much as this business is competitive in it just can mess your head up, just like trying to shake the insecurities that I think this business can throw on you.
And we all have them. And
yeah.
We all had one point in our careers where we kind of questioned it. I can only think what it was like for you to move to LA and you were freelancing, and that freelance life is tenuous, and being able to keep your focus and keep your head through all that.
Sometimes, but once you get it down, it's so freeing. It's nice. You'd be like, wait, do I, it's when you can really lock it down, it's nice.
So how can people get in contact with you, and where can they find your podcast, and generally where can they find you?
Well, stay out of my DMs, but you can find me on Instagram and Twitter. I'm Brooke on Air, Brooke with an E, if you don't know. And then my podcast, it's on iTunes, it's on Spotify, it's on every podcast listening platform, whichever one you like to use. It's called Controlling Our Narrative, and it's really fun, and I'd love to hear what you think.
That is Brooke Thomas. She's coming to us via Skype from Los Angeles. I cannot tell you how wonderful it is to be able to finally talk to you. And actually, and really, this has been so cool.
This has been fun for me too.
I swear if you don't know who she is, you should get to know who she is, because you're going to see a lot of her. And she's missed here in Philadelphia. It's the first time I saw you. I remember turning on the
I'm actually going to be in Philly, like in a couple weeks.
Well, then definitely we have to get in contact with each other.
I haven't been back to Philly in so long, but I'm going to be in New York for something. And then my friend Trang Do, she's a reporter at KYW.
I owe Trang so much, because Trang helped me get my job. And I've said this.
She's magic, right? She's just
awesome.
A beautiful person. She is. And so Trang had a baby, my little nephew. And so I am dying to meet him and to see him. So since I'm going to be in New York, it just made sense. I missed the baby shower, I missed the gender reveal. I have to go and spend some time with him. And my other good friend there, Renee, she just got engaged. And so I was on the phone with Renee the other day, and I tell them that I'm going to be in New York, and it just made all the sense.
Well, we will be
to make that little 2-hour trek. So I'm going to be in Philly for a couple days.
Well, we will definitely be in contact. Brooke, this is wonderful. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you so much for coming on JSC Radio with me. And obviously, I wish you nothing but the best of success.
Thank you so much.
It's always good to see you on TYT and everywhere else. So thank you so much for this.
Thank you.